Hi everyone, today I want to talk to you about natural selection. Natural selection is really the main mechanism for the evolution of populations. So here we're talking about how populations evolve. Okay, and this is our main explanation for how that happens. There are other mechanisms that we'll get into, but this is sort of the primary one, and natural selection is really the only one that leads to adaptation within a population. Now, you need to understand before we even start talking about natural selection what evolution is. Now, evolution is just a change in the genetics of a population over time. Okay, so it's a change in the genetics of a population over time. Natural selection is one cause of that change. We need to understand natural selection because a lot of what we see in biology doesn't make sense unless we understand how natural selection works. Okay, so this is one of the central unifying theories of biology and exceptionally important. We'll be talking about it all the time. Okay, so let's talk about the primary components of this. So the first component of natural selection, the way that natural selection works, is that there is variation within a population. So we have a population with variety in traits or variation in traits. So if you look to the right in our little diagram here, you can see there's three different colors of beetles, right? So there's variation. Now that variation must be genetic. Okay, so there must be a genetic basis for the variation. Now, if it happened that these beetles were painted brown, yellow, and gray, there's no genetic variation for their color, and they actually can't pass down the gene that causes that color because there isn't a gene for color. The third is that variations lead to differential success in reproduction and survival. Lead to differential, that means different, differential success in reproduction and survival. Okay. And the fourth is that successful variants become more common. And that means, of course, that the less successful variants become less common. And we can see this here in the diagram. The selective force here is our bird eating up the beetles, and it's picking on the yellow ones. Okay, so we had variation in the traits. There's a genetic basis for this variation. We're assuming that yellow ones give birth to more yellow ones and brown ones give birth to more brown ones, and that these variations are leading to differential success, right? These gray and brown ones are surviving better because they're not being eaten, and they're likely reproducing more than the yellow ones because they're living longer. Okay, so we have differential success in reproduction and survival, and then of course the successful variants become more common, they live longer, they give birth to more offspring, and that means that the population is going to change. And so that's important to note here, is that the population of beetles changes. Individuals don't evolve. Okay, it's only the population that actually changes. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about real quickly is an example of this. So we said that natural selection is a mechanism for change in a population. It's one of several, but it does lead to adaptation. In a population. Now we could say that our beetle population is better adapted now for living with these in the presence of these birds because it no longer has as many yellow individuals in it. Okay, here's another example that's kind of interesting. It's related to human evolution. A lot of people think that humans are no longer evolving, but we are. We evolve mostly in response to things that are trying to infect us, so bacteria and viruses, that type of thing. But bubonic plague was responsible for Black Death. It was in the 13th and 14th century, mostly in Europe, but also in Asia as well. And millions of people died. Millions of people died. So let's just suppose that there was existing in that population in Northern Europe a gene variant, okay, that gave individuals resistance to the bubonic plague, okay, and that helped them to survive and reproduce better than those that didn't have that resistance. And so over time, the population changed in the face of this selective pressure from bubonic plague. Okay, so that we now have a population that, when it started out, maybe this variant wasn't very common, but now it's much more common because it helped individuals to survive and reproduce during this time in Northern Europe. Okay, now it just so happens, really interesting coincidence, that there are people of Northern European ancestry that have what's called it's a co-receptor on their cell. This is showing a co-receptor. It's this little molecule here. It's a protein that they actually have a defective version of this co-receptor. Okay, it doesn't work the way it does in most people. In most people, it's there, and it actually is one of kind of the keys for the HIV virus to get into our cells. Okay, so some people of Northern European ancestry actually don't have this this protein here, or it's actually a different shape, and it doesn't work to allow the HIV in here. Most people believe, that it's a solid hypothesis, that the reason a sizable portion of people of Northern European ancestry either carry the gene or actually sort of express this characteristic where they don't have this receptor is because that receptor also was involved in giving them resistance to bubonic plague, or their ancestors' resistance to bubonic plague 800 years ago, whatever it turns out to be. Okay, so the population in Northern Europe had changed as a result of bubonic plague, and then coincidentally, that same adaptation that helped to prevent you from being infected by the bubonic plague also helps you to resist being infected by HIV. Pretty interesting. So that's natural selection. Again, one mechanism for evolution in a population. Thanks.